Devil in a red dress. Call 911, I'm a killer. You know I hate to confess. Bang, bang, got my hand on the trigger. The devil in
Hello,
a red
Trabant.
Hello,
dress.
Tito.
Call 911.
Look at this old picture. Who do we see kneeling here? And where is this happening? I can see a wreath here and some soldiers. So this looks like a memorial.
This is 1970, and the man who dropped to his knees is Willy Brandt, who was the West German Chancellor, and he visited a memorial for the Warsaw Ghetto uprising, and he showed his remorse for the fallen victims, which caused lots of sympathies all around the world.
Well, I can imagine. I mean, this has been described as a turning point in the sort of German apology or repentance for its sins in the Second World War.
Yeah, it seemed like it was considered as a great gesture,
Right, right.
and
I think it was
uh,
unexpected. Yeah.
yeah, maybe because it was unexpected. Yeah. So so unfortunately, we can't see anything like this from Japan, from the Japanese
Well,
prime minister.
let's look at the well. I mean, we do see, the here we can see the for one of the former Japanese Prime Minister Yukio Hatoyama bowing, and his wife, bowing as they mourn the victims of the Nanjing massacre. And this is fairly recent, right? The
Mhm.
point is that maybe there was it wasn't seen as such a big gesture by the other countries, right? Or
Mhm.
as some
Mhm.
kind of an unexpected gesture, So it might still be some maybe it's something that will happen in the future. Japan sort of seems to be waiting for this kind of a breakthrough moment in how the country assesses its own history.
Apparently, in the Japanese culture, they have this so-called dogezu. It's like the performance then when the individual kneels and bows his head to the ground. But Japan has never done it.
Yeah,
So
there is
they
Dogisa. There is obviously, this kind of a very deep Japanese bow, where you almost hit your forehead against the floor,
uh-huh.
right? So obviously, yes, if a Japanese politician would be captured doing this, at some state visit, I think this would have been seen as a turning point. But
But
I
for
yeah.
some reason they never done it.
Yeah, well, that's
Yeah.
it's a good question. Why? You know,
hmm Yeah.
because
Why not?
yeah,
Why not?
right. Well, we have to look at history. I mean, Germany was occupied by several Allied powers and
hmm
really underwent a thorough process of denazification.
hmm
Japan was
Yeah.
also occupied after the Second World War, but the occupation was, for the most part, carried out by the United States. The Soviet Union kind of declined to participate in this, and a few years after the occupation, the strategic interests of the United States would shift, from fighting fascism or remnants thereof to fighting communism. So
hmm
what happened was a lot of the Japanese war criminals that were tried, they would or they were imprisoned and then were not hung. They would be slowly released into the society. and I guess eventually, some of them might make it back into administration.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, seems like Germany was punished harshly, more harshly than Japan. Like there was the Nazification. The Germany was divided. Germany lost lots of territory. Germany was forcefully denazified, which even people had to denounce any sympathies towards the former Nazi regime.
Right, right.
Uh, they suffered greatly. A bigger percentage of German population died than the Japanese.
Second
Germany's
World War, right? Yeah, yeah. When
Second
you
World War.
look at the population percentages, yeah, this makes sense.
Yeah, basically every German city was affected. Was damaged or sometimes totally destroyed by the Allied forces.
Yeah.
In Japan, it didn't happen. What happened in Japan was that the Americans dropped like two nuclear weapons that even didn't have very, except they killed like immediately maybe 80,000 people, and later other 80,000 people died of
Radiation poisoning.
yeah, poisoning or radiation, and other injuries. Um, the bomb exploded in the air, so the aftermath wasn't as bad as, for example, it would be now. It would be probably now.
No, I
Would
don't.
be like
I don't think that's. I don't know if that is accurate. Also, the now I think with the a lot of the thermonuclear weapons, the hydrogen bombs, they have a they're not supposed to irradiate an area. They're supposed to have a lower radiation yield. But these were small, relatively small weapons compared to current ones.
yeah. So Japan territory wasn't as much destroyed as were the German cities,
It's a good point.
and
Yeah.
also Germany killed lots of its own population, either because there were the Jewish population or people of different political affiliation. While
Different, yeah,
Japanese,
political, religious, whatever people who who didn't fit the Nazi regime.
yeah, while the Japanese killed mostly foreigners, right?
I yeah, I mean, yes, there wasn't such a systematic, I suppose, such a systematic eradication of its
Yeah.
own citizens, unless of course you count the let's say the Koreans and the people living in Taiwan, the areas that the Japanese Empire would occupy after the first Sino-Japanese War. They would be seen as the Japanese subjects. But, Germany also, had to give up some of its territory, give it back to Poland. I mean, Japan never had to renounce some of its, core area, the
Mhm.
four big islands, except, maybe some the lower part of Sakhalin and some of the
Kurili Islands.
Kuril Islands. Yeah, I mean, yeah, this is just some small, not very populated areas in the north.
And also Americans didn't push the Japanese too much for any denazification because they kind of needed Japan to find communism that was on the rise.
Right. Yeah. I mean, China has you know turned communist with the victory of the PRC in 1949. And after that, North Korea invaded South Korea in 1950. So, you
Mhm,
know.
mhm,
You don't want to if you want to send soldiers here to fight in Korea. Do you want to you don't want to have them spending so much time occupying Japan.
mhm, mhm, mhm. Correct. So you mentioned the first Sino-Japanese War,
Yeah,
right? So let's talk about it very quickly.
this
So
was
it started 1894, right?
yeah, I think that was the beginning. It was a very brief war. that ended with an
Mhm.
armistice in 1895. And this was kind of seen as a turning point, where Japan would uh, win against the Qing Empire, and yeah, basically as a peace settlement, it would get Taiwan, and Korea would come into its sphere of
Mhm.
influence.
Yeah, it started basically like 6 7 months, and Japan basically defeated the Qing dynasty, and
And that Japan has, in the previous 40 or so years, has modernized itself, right? Whereas the
right.
Qing Empire, has been very slow to do that
Yes, yes,
by that point.
basically nothing. And after this, Qing dynasty lost Korea as a tributary state.
Right.
Korea was like 250 years tributary state to China.
And Taiwan became a Japanese colony.
Right, right.
We'll see,
And
kind of
so,
as a model colony, but
Mhm,
I'm not sure how the people felt about
mhm, mhm.
that.
So all this sparked it was the end of the Qing dynasty and sparked the political changes in China, and China became a republic.
Yeah, and this helped propel the Xinhai Revolution forward,
Hmm.
which happened
Hmm.
in 1911. But here is is a cartoon from, I guess, from those times. Probably a Russian cartoon, because it says Korea on this pole, and we can see the Japanese soldier stepping over the Korean Yangban, which were the Korean gentry, kind of dragging or holding the Manchu Chinese, the Qing Dynasty Chinese soldier, by the
Hmm.
braid. And here we see the Russian soldiers, slowly looking on. Yeah.
Hmm. Hmm.
Well, the point is, Japan was not content to stop with Korea. Now they see, wow, look how successful we were. Why don't we keep going? And this led to a series of expansions, culminating in the Second World War, or the War in the Pacific. And this is so we can see that Japan would first try to expand into Manchuria, right? The reason was because this area was had a lot of mineral resources that Japan could use to further fuel its own growth.
Hmm. Now we are talking about the second Sino-Japanese war, right?
Almost. I mean, we're getting there.
Mm.
Actually, the first thing that happened here, the very significant thing that happened, was the railway incident that Japan staged, where Japanese agents blew up a railway carriage, not causing a lot of damage, but using this as a pretext for the occupation of Manchuria.
Mhm, mhm,
Then, I mean, the League of Nations would see right through this, and they would tell Japan to pull out. And how did Japan respond? Well, they simply walked out of the League of Nations, and the League of Nations was not able to um, muster up any sort of a military action, or find any way to make Japan back down and retreat
mhm.
from Manchuria. And
That was a
after that,
predecessor of the United Nations, right? League of
right,
Nations.
right. So this kind
Uh-huh.
of proved it as a kind of a toothless institution. After that,
I
there
would
would be
like
the
today, United Nations. Mhm.
in a certain sense, yes.
Right.
Then we come 5 years later.
Mhm.
In 1937 marks the start of the Second Sino-Japanese War, where
Right.
fighting broke out, between all of China proper and Japan, as a result of the
Mhm.
Marco Polo bridge incident. A soldier
Oh,
would
okay.
not be able to. The Japanese would be looking for a soldier. They would cross the Marco Polo bridge in Beijing, and essentially, fighting would break out. And the Japanese, they wouldn't want to back down, because they would have liked to occupy all of or as much of China proper as would be possible. So here we see,
Uh-huh.
the Japanese Imperial Army slowly expanding into China. Yeah.
Hmm.
Obviously into other parts of Asia as part of the Second World War. But remember, most of this came a little bit later in the late 1930s, early 1940s. If you look down here on the map, yeah. But the from the most of the brunt of the war was before 1941 was borne by China. So there would be fighting, there would be a lot of dying by soldiers and civilians in China. Yeah.
Hmm.
Um,
Right.
yeah. Here we can see, the kind of the extent of Japanese occupation, and we see, some communist guerrillas popping up in different areas as well. The main base of the Chinese communists at this point would be in Yan'an, where they have retreated after being on the long march, being pursued by the nationalist army,
Yeah,
by
Kuomintang. Hmm.
Kuomintang.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Right.
So I mean, we do see some communist guerrillas popping up in different zones, but the I don't I'm not sure how strong the main communist foothold would be. There would be after the uh, long march, it would be kind of the soldiers of the Chinese Red Army would be sort of licking their wounds here in the mountains, maybe not wanting to engage anyone too much.
Hmm. Okay, let's talk about the CCP, as you mentioned it, like how much they were actually involved in all of this fighting.
It's a good question. I mean, this is not such a large area compared to all the other parts of China.
Yeah. When you live in China and watch all these anti-Japanese war movies, you would have the impression that the Communist Party was
Like
fighting,
bore the brunt of this anti-Japanese aggression.
right?
And
But
what did not help were Chiang Kai-shek's statements, like the communists are a disease of the soul, and the Japanese
mm,
they're just disease of the skin.
yeah,
Nonetheless, as you wanted to mention,
yeah. So let's sum up this story. Like from 1937 to 1945, there were 23 battles when both sides employed at least a regiment each.
both you mean the
And
nationalists and the communist guerrillas,
yeah, against the Japanese, right?
right? Yeah.
And the only one time, only one battle out of these 23 battles, the communists participated with only in one of them with between 1,000 to 1,500 men. And only it was like a security detachment. So they were like on the flanks. They were doing nothing, and actually their orders to kind of undermine Kuomintang's
They
progress.
were not happy to work together.
So
These
basically, when you talk about the involvement, there were zero involvement in any major battle that Kuomintang fought against the Japanese. Zero.
I mean,
Basically
even
zero.
yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
Chinese communist leaders they themselves admitted, that we were not fighting that much. Yeah, Zhou Enlai
Yeah.
mentioned to Stalin, that maybe only about 3% of the forces were uh, Chinese communist forces, and now that was probably already an exaggeration if you look at the
Yeah, and it
actual
was a
numbers.
secret report. He would never publicly acknowledge that CCP basically didn't find in any any battle
So
against the
I
Japanese.
mean, not to take credit away from anyone, but I mean, just look at the situation. The communist
Yeah.
base in the north. would be a lot small, and fighting would be going on all along the front. So
It
obviously,
was
yeah,
like a
they
strategy.
cannot.
I'm sure
The Chinese
they were
communists cannot take.
instructed by the Soviets. Let the Kuomintang bleed out. You guys don't get involved. Just wait
That's
out.
that's a good
Let them
point.
bleed.
Might have happened. Yeah.
I'm sure there was a strategy. Let the others
Hmm.
fight.
Yeah.
This fight against the invaders. You
This
just wait.
this this was how the Soviet Union was behaving, and how what they were suggesting at some point.
Yeah, yeah. Basically, they were cowards. And a part of these 23 major battles, there were also like between 1937 to 1945, 40,000 skirmishes. And in these 40,000 skirmishes, the CCP fought 200. It's 0.5%.
Yeah, it's not a lot. Yeah.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah,
So
there was nothing.
kind of hard to take a lot of credit. Yeah.
So while the Kuomintang were busy uniting the country and lighting the Japanese military, CCP forces spent much of the early part of the war hiding in the mountains to avoid battle.
Yeah, I mean, it's a small area. There was not quite that many of them, so you
Yeah,
know, not to blame them, but you can't take credit for most of what you did not do.
no, no, they can in their propaganda movies.
Yes, you see this a lot, right?
Yeah, a lot on Chinese TV.
Yeah. What we well, because let's be honest, there were a lot of massacres committed and a lot of war crimes and atrocities committed by the Japanese Imperial Army. The most
Yeah, there were
famous,
also massacres committed by the CCP, but let's talk about the Japanese because their massacres
they kind of stand out in
they stand out.
the
Yes.
terms of their brutality and in the sheer
Mm-hmm.
numbers.
Mm-hmm.
Just the most infamous example would be the Nanjing massacre. Nanjing was the capital of China before of nationalist China um, before it was occupied by Japan, and after the Japanese forces marched into the city, basically
Mm-hmm.
they did whatever they wanted in the city.
Right, right.
So a lot of people would be killed, a lot of women would be raped and violated on a
Yeah,
scale that was not, you know, maybe not seen before that.
basically the whole story goes like Chiang Kai-shek ordered the removal of nearly all official Chinese troops from the city and left the city defended only by untrained auxiliary troops. And I believe that first they informed the Japanese they would be giving up, they would surrender. But when the Japanese arrived, they put up some fight, and that enraged the Japanese, and they were probably the morale of the Japanese was low at the time
Let's see.
for some reason, and so when they entered the city, they started so-called rape of Nanjing, which lasted like for like 2 months.
Basically, the commanders, they were not very willing, or not they did they were not very able to stop it, these war atrocities from happening.
Yeah,
If anything, they were complicit.
they entered the city on December 13th, and all these killings continue until the first week of February.
I mean, this is ridiculous.
That's 2 months.
What the hell?
Yeah, 2 months. And they say between 20,000 to 80,000 women were brutally raped and tortured, including young girls and elderly women. Many were victims of gang rapes. They were mutilated and killed after being assaulted. Yeah, the soldiers were killed instantly, I believe. So they estimated between 200 to 300,000 people were killed in this massacre.
Goodness.
Mm.
Terrible. I mean, as just as an example, here is something that you can even see in Chinese textbooks. For example, I
Mm.
don't know, in grade, you might see this in a grade six textbook. The
Mm.
reference to a competition that
Mm.
two Japanese officers would have about how many people they would behead, right?
So they were
Over
competing between each other.
Yes, one kill over, and this was published in newspapers, so there is a record of this happening. One killed,
Yeah.
and most of these people were captured already.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Prisoners of war,
Yeah, they were
probably.
prisoners of war. Maybe one of them mentioned that he killed maybe three or four people in combat, and then the others after they gave up, he would continue the competition. He would chop their heads down.
You're just sick.
So it's just sickening. Yeah.
Sickening.
The point I wanted to bring up was that sometimes you see this mentioned in Chinese textbooks because I mean the government does like to mention this rather than mentioning any of its own wrongdoings
Well,
in
yeah, we know
Chinese
the
society.
communist Mao Zedong killed many, many more people. So about 20 million Chinese people died in the second Sino-Japanese war, while Mao Zedong killed like maybe 40, 60 million.
Yeah.
So I think that they try to diverse the
Divert
blame.
well, not I'll divert the attention towards
Yeah.
toward Japanese. I mean, the communists fought the Japanese. So if the worse the Japanese look, the better the communists
Hmm.
look in comparison. Yeah.
Hmm. Hmm. Hmm.
So yeah, combined with the fact with the kind of a seeming lack of repentance for its crimes, it creates this kind of a vicious circle that has
Hmm.
been haunting Asia. Obviously, this involves more countries, including Korea, including Taiwan and all the other all the other countries that were occupied or attacked, invaded by Imperial Japan.
Well,
Now,
this is what happened to the Germans as well. They also had a tribunal, right?
right? Yeah,
So war tribunal.
that's true.
So this would be the same, I would say.
Yes, but and actually there were several tribunals. One of them was in Tokyo. Another was held in Singapore. The point is, for example, we do see here we can see the trial of then Premier or Prime Minister of Japan Hideki Tojo, and he was executed by hanging. So
Mhm.
he was convicted war criminal. The one thing that was kind of hinted at was that the occupation powers, this was mostly the United States, for example, would not try the Emperor of Japan. Here we can see a picture of Emperor Hirohito with then the head of the Allied occupation forces, the U.S. occupation forces, General MacArthur.
Mhm.
Right. I don't know the reasons for this. I assume that the United States did not have anyone in mind who could replace the emperor, and maybe they were worried how the Japanese population would take this. So if the Japanese emperor would renounce his divinity, as he did, and the call for a surrender of Japan, then this was seen as sufficient in the eyes of the United States, and they basically protected the imperial family from having any harm come to them after Japan's defeat and Japan's surrender.
Probably the surrender was negotiated
Right.
before, so they probably agreed that the emperor wouldn't be touched before
Yes. Yes.
surrender.
Yeah.
I'm guessing. Interestingly, 37% Americans believe that Japan has sufficiently apologized for its military actions, and further 24% say no apology is required.
Well, I mean, let's look at the other countries here as well. Let's look at the ones countries in Asia, right? We can see, South Korea, which was occupied by Japan, from 1895 until 1945, so for 50 years, right? They don't see it as sufficient, and neither does China. Yeah, it's also above
Interestingly,
78%.
South Korea really hates Japan, according to the stats. Like recently, they've been talking about this apology for the so-called comfort women. That maybe, yeah,
So we're
maybe
basically women who were drafted into the army and basically would serve as prostitutes
in
for
the
the
brothels.
soldiers.
Yes. So 98% of South Korean believe that Japan hasn't apologized enough, right? Sufficiently.
Yeah. I
And
mean, I'm sure the maybe the South Korean government might like to use this for its own propaganda in let's say sometime before. I'm not sure when, but we know that it was still an unpopular decision when South Korea normalized its relations with Japan in the 1960s.
Mhm, mhm. China, 78% people believe that Japan hasn't apologized sufficiently.
Yeah. So
I
and
think that sounds correct.
yeah, it very well might be. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
I mean,
interesting.
so it has created this kind of a vicious circle. The fact that a lot of people don't see, the apology as being sufficient enough, and the Chinese government being happy to, point to Japanese war crimes, whenever its own humanitarian record is brought up. Yeah.
Mhm.
No. So the only successful time when this was not an issue was in the very early 1970s. After
Mhm.
following suit, after the United States, Japan would also normalize its relations with Japan. Here we can see the then Japanese Prime Minister Tanaka Kakuei with
Mhm.
Zhou Enlai. Both seem to
So
be
this is
very
the
happy.
same time when Nixon arrives, right, in China.
Yeah, this was this was also 51 years ago this year, and
Yes.
yeah, eventually meeting with Mao Zedong as well. So China was very happy, to be recognized by Japan. They would get some money and investment from Japan. And
Mhm.
well, Japan would be happy at that time because they would be able to expand their industries into China.
I wonder if Mao Zedong offered to the Japanese Prime Minister 10 million women
Oh God,
just as
yeah, no,
profit. Probably.
that is a horrible
That would be too
joke.
much.
Yeah, maybe too much.
Yeah, but it's true. It's not just a joke. It's Mao Zedong offered Henry Kissinger 10 million women to be sent to the U.S. and he
He,
meant it.
yeah, he mentioned, well, we don't have a lot, but we have a lot of girls. Do you want some?
Yeah, I don't think he would say something like this to the Japanese Prime
Probably
Minister.
not. No, no, no,
Probably not.
no. No.
Yes.
But the relations jumped from a very low point to a very high point, and since then they have been slowly going downhill. Right, as China has become economically more significant, and as Japan has become economically less significant, or as Japan's economic growth has slowly stalled since the 1990s.
Uh-huh.
So
Uh-huh.
then we get cartoons like this, the history coming back to haunt Japan in its relations,
Uh-huh.
including things like Japanese politicians visiting places like the Yasukuni Shrine. This is an issue because some of the people who were tried and convicted as war criminals are buried here, and according to Shintoism, people believe that their souls reside there, and they were servants of the emperor, so they should be given some uh, post mortem reverence.
Yeah, they are worshipped. These war criminals, Japanese war criminals, are literally worshipped.
So every
So
time that a Japanese politician visits the Asakuni Shrine, you can you can hear about it in the press. Countries like Korea and China, they will point it out.
this is interesting. October 2005, Prime Minister Shinzo Abe, who was assassinated, I believe, last year. So he apologized. He apologized for the some of the actions during the Second World War,
Right.
and later, 2 years later, he retracted his apology. And he was talking particularly about the Imperial Japanese Army had forced comfort women into sexual slavery. So first, 2006, he apologized for it, and two
And
years
he,
later, he
he
retracted.
takes it back. It's a little
He did that.
ridiculous. Come on.
Yes.
No. Why would you do that? I mean, it says something must have changed. So this is maybe aimed at domestic audiences, but
He
this
was
is
forced by his own party, probably, because like the
something
same way he
like this. Yeah.
apologized, as soon as he apologized, 80 Japanese lawmakers, parliament members, visited the Yasukuni Shrine.
Well, they could have gone
As
to
many
they could have gone to visit anyway, but why even retract an apology? It's
No, I believe the story
ridiculous.
goes like they visited the shrine because of his apology.
Yes. Yeah.
So he
Possible.
apologized,
This was seen like, oh, okay, well, yeah.
yeah, and they were like, "Oh, let's go to the shrine to apologize for our war criminals, to our war criminals." You know, unbelievable. So another reason is like many, many Japanese deny the massacre in Nanjing, for example. Like,
They don't want to admit that they
like
did
this
these
is something like
things.
if the Germans deny the massacre of the Jews.
Yeah, I
The
mean,
same thing.
obviously you do see Holocaust deniers on the fringes of society, but
Yeah.
most people they are able to acknowledge this and they are able to talk about this.
Another reason, the Japanese Navy still uses the same flag that was used during the World War II.
Yes, it would
Just
be
like the
yeah.
Germans are still using Nazi flag in their army. The same thing.
That was it. It's. I mean, the flags. They have an older tradition. Well, the Japanese at least they would switch the flags, but it's seen
Okay,
kind
that's
of
different.
kind of yeah, but it's seen kind of ironic by
No,
the
no,
other
it is kind of,
countries.
yeah, there is kind of excuse for it because the Germans are still using the same anthem, right? Like before.
Yeah, but yes,
So,
yes, but they did change
yeah.
the well, they did drop out some of the words,
Mhm.
some of the lyrics.
Yes, right. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. The point is, how does this all come back to China, right? I mean, this is more of an issue maybe for Korea, which is, very close to Japan, and sees this as something that's very sensitive. Well,
Mm.
China, sometimes uses this rhetoric of Japanese war crimes, to either convince its own people, that
Mm.
we are good, our government, our communist party, we fought the Japanese, we can't be bad, right? We fought against
Mhm.
the bad Japanese, and so we didn't do anything bad. After that, look at what the Japanese done again. Yeah. And even now it has come to a point where they tell other countries, better watch out for those Japanese.
Oh
I
yeah.
mean, let's look at this example. This is from the I guess the Chinese
Chinese New Year
New
probably.
Year
Um,
reception in Australia, right? You can see
in
the
Canberra, Chinese embassy.
yeah, panda and the koala in close brotherhood. Well, let's take a look at what was mentioned what the Chinese ambassador was saying.
The diplomatic deep
Okay.
freeze begins to thaw. Beijing's top envoy is warning Australia to be wary of its growing alliance with a former World War II enemy.
If we forget history, history might repeat itself.
Invoking Imperial Japan's bombing of Darwin 80 years ago and atrocities committed against Australian prisoners of war. Japan's hit back, claiming China is the modern threat.
Here, Australia and Japan are in total sync. And we are working together to uphold the rules-based order.
China's ambassador also taking aim at the AUKUS submarine pact, warning it'll become an expensive mistake.
And this is
Well, yeah. So it's mixing completely the two different things, the past and the present. Obviously, Japan is not threatening anyone in the region anymore.
Yes. Yes. There is no conflict is likely to happen. So why does he have the urge to remind Australians their own history?
Because they want to, yes, China wants to be seen as better. Don't work with the Japanese so much. Keep working with us. Work with us more. Right? When in fact, it's China that is flexing its muscle in the South China Sea and
Yeah.
around the Taiwanese Strait. Um,
Japan doesn't have any offensive
no.
military.
But you will
It
see
was
this argument, against Japanese expansionism popping up in the future as Japan, it's increasing its military capacity to counter any potential threat from China. So this will
this
keep
this
coming back.
this behavior
This
of
rhetoric.
this I say so-called because the Chinese very often use this word so-called. So this
It's
so-called Chinese ambassador to Australia is so immature. Like look at him, like the way he behaves, the body language. I
I
mean,
no, it wasn't.
he's not a professional. Look at him.
It wasn't seen. Yeah, wasn't seen as
He's
very
a
good.
joke. Yeah, this is not okay. And just considering all the victims, also all the Chinese victims to this second
Japanese
Sino-Japanese
war.
war, they are just using them, for their own benefits.
Yeah, no, yeah, it's yeah, you could say that. Yeah. And the government
Absolutely.
is, kind of abusing their memory,
Imagine that
for its
Israel
for
would be
its own
expanding.
political gain.
Imagine that Israel would be expanding maybe to, I don't know, Egypt or any country, and would be using its the fallen or the Jewish victims that died in the concentration camps. I mean, it's
You
just
have a point, right? Or for example, Israel telling other countries, don't work with Germany that much.
yeah, exactly. Remember what happened? That will happen again. History repeats itself.
So
Yeah,
no, I
nonsense.
mean, and luckily in Europe, it has been handled a little bit better than it has been handled in Japan and China.
Right, correct.
So
So we have these two countries, South Korea and China, that the majority, I mean, big majority of the country believe that the Japanese hasn't apologized sufficiently.
put North Korea there as well, but I don't think there was any poll going on there.
Right. And for example, Japanese themselves, they believe they are split half-half. They half of the country thinks they hasn't apologized enough, which is interesting, isn't it?
We kind of
Yeah.
says like, yeah, maybe maybe it's true. Yeah, but they
They're kind of
obviously they
skeptical.
don't. Yeah, they don't want to remind themselves of these past things they've done.
Interestingly, also the Japanese women and Japanese men are approximately the same. Also, half women, half Japanese men believe that they still should apologize properly. And yeah,
Well, I mean, I'm really hoping that some political climate will come, where some Japanese politician will, will do this. The reason why it hasn't happened was probably because they are worried about their own political future, right? They're worried that okay, maybe if I'm too apologetic, I will have no political future. No one's going to elect me again.
uh, Japan has in its constitution Article 9 that enables, actually forbids Japanese to establish official military, and Japanese themselves, like 58%, oppose the changes. They
They, I don't think they see a reason to do it. Although their opinion, has slowly been moving, more in the favor
correct,
of further militarization. Um,
correct.
and then
Yeah.
this is basically this is related to China's growth and development,
China's aggressive behavior
especially that. Yeah. I
hmm
mean, obviously, if China was not, behaving aggressively in the South China Sea, then there is no logic why this should be happening. Or Japan wouldn't be having given any reason,
hmm hmm
or they couldn't say that we have a reason to feel threatened.
hmm hmm
But yeah,
That's correct.
until these until these issues are solved in the future, until Japan does provide a more thorough apology, and then until China, kind of also looks honestly at its own history and stops blaming its neighbors for everything, then
Well,
this will keep
sometimes
it will keep coming up back again and again and again.
Sometimes to apologize, it's also helpful if you feel like the other people are prepared to accept your apology. So,
Sure.
so maybe if you feel like the South Koreans or Chinese are not going to accept your apology no matter what, even maybe if tomorrow, that's my feeling, if a Chinese prime minister arrives in Beijing
A
or in
Japanese prime
Seoul,
minister. Yeah.
a Japanese prime minister arrives and bends its knees, probably the media would be writing about how hypocritical it is and how they are
Yeah.
not serious
So, I
about.
mean, this is a good question. Yeah, it is a
But
valid
maybe in 50
question.
years, maybe somebody will have to do it sooner or later because it's not going to go away. And
It's not. Yeah, it will not just. We can't postpone this forever. Just keep deferring it into the future and hoping no one's going to notice. So,
right.
but
hmm
for the time being, I predict it's going to keep reappearing, these issues.
hmm hmm Right. Probably.
So yeah, the only time it was good was when the countries really wanted to repair their relations. Yeah. So
Interesting. Yeah.
I'm sure if Japan would become a lot poorer and China would become a lot richer, they would be they might be begging for an apology. Yeah.
No.
But yeah, we don't see any of that. We see Japan has been the growth of Japan has been declining since the 1990s, and China might slowly be on that down that path as well. So
Probably. Yeah.
there will I don't know. Yeah. We don't see. I don't imagine the current Japanese emperor, going down to Nanjing, and bowing down there. So yeah, we'll see what happens, but it's going to keep coming up.
Yeah. Probably not in this decade. We won't see anything like that. Yeah.
Well, hopefully it'll get solved one day.
Yep.
All
Yeah.
right. Well, then let's finish here, and I'll see you again next time.
Okay. See you next time,
All
Tito.
right. Take care. Bye bye.
Bye bye.